The laughter came first, sharp, mean, and eager to please the man who had provoked it. Are you sure you know how to use that thing, sweetheart? Gunnery Sergeant Travis Boone drawled, his tone dipped in condescension. He stood with arms folded, casting a long shadow across the firing line. His eyes fixed on the woman crouched at his boots, her hands steady as she guided a chalking wheel across the baked earth. The recruits behind him, raw, anxious Marines, desperate for approval, snickered on cue. Boone didn't smile. He didn't have to. Their laughter was his applause. But Staff Sergeant Evelyn Lark did not look up. The chalker rolled forward in her grip, leaving a flawless white stripe against the dust. Her posture betrayed no irritation, no need to answer the insult. To Boone, her silence was weakness. To the recruits, it was proof she was out of place. Yet only yards away, silence meant something different to another set of eyes. From the observation tower, General Wallace watched through his binoculars, not the chalk line, not Boone's bluster, but the woman herself. Moments like this rarely happen by accident. They are pressure points, small humiliations that swell into something greater. Boone had been the self-appointed gatekeeper of this elite sniper qualification course for years, his authority cemented through a voice that could rattle windows and a memory packed with regulations. He had reduced dozens of Marines to dust with nothing more than a barked word or a withering glare. To him, Shaw was an easy mark, a staff sergeant doing a menial chore here, pulled tight but strands slipping loose, fatigue smudged with paint dust. She looked ordinary. That was enough. The truth was more complicated. Lark carried herself with an economy of movement that belonged to someone who had spent years learning how to vanish into silence. Her every gesture, setting the chalker down, straightening the line, brushing grit from her hands, spoke not of servitude, but of mastery. She was not there to command attention. She was there to do the work. And while Boone believed he had just scored another public victory, the reality was that he had stumbled into a different kind of battle, one he could never shout his way through. Conflict often begins in whispers, a mocking laugh, a crooked smile, an assumption made too quickly. The recruits believed they were watching a joke, a lesson in dominance from their instructor. What they were truly witnessing was the opening move in a confrontation far greater than they could imagine. For the range itself, the desert wind, the silent rifles in their racks, the 1,000-yard targets shimmering in heat mirage was about to demand something none of them were prepared to give. And when that demand came, it would not be Boone's voice the range obeyed. It would be Shaw's silence. The desert had a way of turning silence into something heavy, almost sacred. One moment the air on the range was filled with Boone's mockery and the recruits' laughter. The next, the world seemed to hold its breath. A shrill alarm broke the stillness, followed by frantic shouts from the control tower. The electronic target system, the pride of the Marine Corps' advanced sniper course, had gone dark. Screens flickered, circuits burned, and the technicians' faces told the story before anyone spoke. The most important qualification test of the year had just lost its backbone. Boone's bravado evaporated instantly. He muttered something about a technical delay, but his voice lacked its usual iron. The recruits, eager a minute earlier to laugh at Staff Sergeant Evelyn Lark now shifted nervously in place. They knew what this meant. The course was about to invoke the old contingency rule. When technology fails, the range itself decides who is worthy. That rule was cruel in its simplicity: one cold-bore shot, maximum distance, no warm-up, no sighting rounds, and no margin for error. It was a test older Marines remembered, the kind that sorted the merely competent from the truly exceptional. 1,000 yards of steel plate shimmering in the desert mirage with a crosswind that felt like it wanted to tear the earth in two. A miss would not just be personal embarrassment. It could end a career for had begun. The instructors knew this. The recruits knew it too. And so when the order was given, no one moved. Not one of the veteran shooters stepped forward. Excuses spilled out quickly: too much wind, unfair conditions, rifles not warmed, visibility compromised. Boone found sudden interest in the dust near his boots. His booming voice, so quick to cut others down, was now silent. It was in that charged pause that a sound carried across the range, quiet but commanding, the soft snap of a chalkbox lid closing. Heads turned. Lark, the same woman Boone had ridiculed, dusted her palms together, leaving faint white streaks on her fatigues. Without hurry, Without hesitation, she walked past the frozen line of recruits and instructors toward the firing position. The sight unsettled everyone. Boone forced a scoff, trying to recover his lost authority. "What are you going to do, Sergeant? Paint the target from here?" But his voice cracked under the strain and his words fell flat. Shaw didn't acknowledge him. Her focus was absolute, the same quiet discipline she had shown moments earlier with the chalk line. She knelt by the sniper rifle laid out on its case, a weapon most feared to touch under such impossible conditions. The recruits watched as her hands, steady and precise, moved with the confidence of long habit. She checked the scope, pressed the magazine into place with a satisfying click, and cycled the bolt in one smooth motion. Each action carried the gravity of ritual, a reminder that skill is not in the noise you make, but in the certainty of what you know. The wind howled across the desert, hot and merciless, tugging at her uniform and snapping Boone's cover from his head. To anyone else, it was chaos. To Shaw, it was information. She lay prone, cheek against the stock, breathing so evenly that even the storm seemed to pause. The recruits, the instructors, even the general in the tower, they were all watching now, not out of curiosity, but out of something else, the recognition that they were standing on the edge of witnessing history. The impossible test had been called, and Shaw, the woman they had dismissed as a line painter, was the only one willing to answer. The rifle was no stranger to fear, but in the hands of Staff Sergeant Evelyn Lark Shaw, it looked like an old friend. She lowered herself into position as though the ground had been waiting for her. The chaos of the range, the shouting technicians, the nervous recruits, the restless wind seemed to fade into the background. What remained was a woman, a rifle, and a target more than half a mile away. Her body settled into the earth, elbows forming a triangle of stability, cheek pressed lightly against the stock. Every movement carried the unhurried precision of long practice. She wasn't rushing to impress. She wasn't posturing for the crowd. She was doing what she had done 1,000 times before, as natural to her as breathing. The gusts that rattled flags and ripped hats from heads didn't rattle her. Shaw studied the wind not with instruments, but with instinct. The small twitch of mirage on the horizon, the sting of sand against her jawline, the subtle pressure on her fingertips, these were her guides. The recruits could not see what she saw, but they sensed it. Silence rolled over them, the kind that tightens the chest and stills the breath. Gunnery Sergeant Travis Boone, who had once commanded the range with his booming voice, stood behind her now like a ghost stripped of his authority by the weight of her calm. He tried to mask his unease, but every second she remained silent made his earlier ridicule echo louder in his own ears. Shaw's breathing slowed so even and quiet that those standing closest swore they could hear the rhythm. Inhale, exhale, pause. Her finger found the trigger not with force but with a gentleness that spoke of control. To anyone watching, the moment stretched impossibly thin, a wire pulled taut between failure and history. Then came the sound. Not the roar of defiance, but the sharp, precise crack of a rifle shot. The desert seemed to swallow the echo whole, leaving only the whistle of the wind. For an instant, no one moved. The recruits craned their necks, squinting at the shimmering distance, uncertain whether hope or doubt should take hold. The answer arrived on the radio from the target pit, a voice trembling with disbelief. Impact. Dead center. My God. Dead center. The words struck harder than the bullet itself. A wave of stunned silence followed, heavier than any laughter that had come before. Men who had mocked her now stared as if seeing her for the first time. Boone's jaw slackened, his face drained of color. General Wallace lowered his binoculars slowly, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes revealed something else: recognition, respect, perhaps even awe. Shaw, for her part, did nothing to claim the moment. She cycled the bolt, cleared the chamber, and laid the rifle down with the same calm that had marked every step. No smile, no fist raised, no victory claimed. She simply brushed the dust from her palms, as though the impossible shot had been nothing more than another task on a long day. That was the power of it. She had turned ridicule into reverence, without a word, without a boast, without anything more than the steady hand of a professional. For the recruits, it was unforgettable, the lesson that strength doesn't need to shout. For Boone, it was humiliation made complete. For Wallace, it was confirmation of something far larger than the day's test. The range had demanded an answer to an impossible question. Lark Shaw had given it not with noise but with precision, and in that silence an entire base began to see her for what she truly was. General Wallace did not move at first. The echo of the shot still hung in the canyon as if even the desert was reluctant to release it. His binoculars lowered slowly, his eyes locked not on the steel plate in the distance, but on Staff Sergeant Evelyn Lark Shaw, who was brushing dust from her palms as though nothing remarkable had happened. The general's gaze shifted to her neck, where the wind had briefly revealed the ink beneath her hairline, a black phoenix rising from fire wings spread wide, a crosshair etched into its chest. For a moment the world seemed to tilt. That symbol was not decoration. It was not the work of some base tattoo parlor. It was a mark whispered about in certain circles, an emblem known only to a few who had walked in places most Marines never would. Wallace had seen it once before years ago during a classified briefing that had left even him humbled. The Phoenix program, part myth, part nightmare, and all legend. The general's boots crunched against the dirt as he descended the tower steps. Every eye on the range followed him. He passed recruits frozen in disbelief, officers stiff with uncertainty, and instructors who had chosen silence over courage. Even Boone, who moments earlier had mocked Shaw with arrogance, shrank back as Wallace walked past him without a word. The general stopped directly before Shaw. She had already cleared the rifle, laid it back in its case, and was standing at ease, her eyes calm, her expression unreadable. Wallace didn't look at her face. His eyes were still drawn to the mark at her neck, the one that spoke more loudly than any introduction ever could. "Bring me her file," Wallace said, his voice low, but carrying across the range like a command from stone. His aide hurried forward, tablet in hand, tapping quickly until the screen filled with classified notations. The general scanned the document, his eyes narrowing, his breath slow. When he looked up, his gaze swept over the assembled Marines before fixing squarely on Boone. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Shaw Wallace began his tone cold, deliberate. Previous assignment classified. Primary MOS 18 Delta Special Forces Weapons Sergeant. The recruits stiffened, even Boone swallowed hard. Wallace continued, letting the weight of each word settle like a hammer. Further qualifications: lead instructor, U.S. Army Special Operations Phoenix Program. The silence that followed was total. Even the desert wind seemed to pause. For the first time, the recruits understood the scale of what they had witnessed. The Phoenix program was not just another school. It was the crucible of crucibles, a place designed to break the best shooters from every branch of the service. Few had survived its trials, fewer still had graduated, and in 3 decades only a handful had earned the title of Phoenix. Wallace closed the tablet and spoke with a weight that left no room for doubt. She didn't just graduate. She holds every record. She wrote the doctrine on high-angle and high-wind engagements, the very doctrine you are failing to teach today. His words cut deep, aimed not at Shaw but at Boone, whose face now betrayed a man stripped of every ounce of false authority. Then, in a gesture that stunned everyone, the 3-star general drew himself to rigid attention and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute to the woman before him. "Your reputation precedes you, Phoenix. It is an honor." The recruits gasped. Boone lowered his eyes, ashamed. Shaw, as always, gave nothing away. She returned the salute with quiet precision, then let her hand fall. She did not bask in the moment. She did not claim it. She simply stood steady and silent as the legend others whispered about was finally revealed in full daylight. News of that salute spread like wildfire. By sundown, every Marine on base knew the story of the impossible shot, the tattoo, and the general who had honored Staff Sergeant Evelyn Lark Shaw. What began as ridicule had become legend, and in the days that followed, the legend reshaped everything it touched. Gunnery Sergeant Travis Boone, once the loudest voice on the range, appeared the next morning before sunrise, broom in hand. No longer barking orders, he moved quietly down the firing line, sweeping brass casings with deliberate care. Later, he sought Shaw out, not with swagger, but with humility. "Sergeant," he said, eyes lowered. "I was arrogant. Will you teach me?" It wasn't an apology spoken for show. It was a request born of respect. Shaw, true to form, answered only with a nod. The recruits who had laughed at her that first day stopped seeing the chalk line as a joke. They began calling it the Shaw line, a place where arrogance ended and skill was proven. Informal training sessions grew out of it, not in classrooms, but on the dust and heat of forgotten corners of the range. Shaw taught them the fundamentals: breathing, wind, patience. But beneath every lesson was something deeper, a creed that competence is quiet, that respect is earned by proof, not noise. Months later, the culture of the base was unrecognizable. The chest-thumping bravado that once filled the air was replaced by something stronger, an unspoken expectation of excellence carried out with humility. And long after her shot, when Shaw's example lived on in the actions of every Marine who crossed that white line. For those of us who've worn the uniform, the lesson is clear: the loudest man in the room is rarely the one who carries the most weight. True authority in war or in life comes from discipline, proof, and silence well kept. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. Tell us about the quiet professionals you have known. And if you want more stories where humility and skill outlast arrogance, subscribe and stay with us, because these are the lessons worth passing on.